Ridge, Alaska, meteorologist Lena Carter was settling in for what she thought would be just another brutal winter night. The wind screamed outside her isolated station like some ancient beast, clawing at the walls and shaking the windows. Inside, Lena sipped her lukewarm coffee, eyes glued to flickering storm data on her screens. The blizzard was gaining strength faster than she'd ever seen. Something unnatural in the patterns. Alone in the station, buried miles from the nearest soul, Lena had grown used to silence. After losing her husband in a climbing accident 2 winters ago, she'd chosen this lonely post to escape the noise of grief. But tonight, something was different. Just as she stood to check the generator, a deep, deliberate thud echoed across the front deck. Then another, and another. Not wind, not falling ice. Something heavy, something knocking. Heart racing, Lena grabbed the flare gun and crept to the window. At first, there was nothing, just snow. Then, emerging from the blinding white, a massive black bear silhouetted against the storm. But this wasn't a charge or an attack. The bear wasn't growling, it wasn't pacing, it was waiting, and dangling from its mouth, barely visible in the porch light. A cub, limp, unmoving. Lena's breath hitched. The bear stepped forward, laid the cub gently on the wooden planks, and then backed into the darkness. The message was clear. Help. Now, and Lena knew. Everything was about to change. Lena's breath misted in the freezing air as she yanked open the door, wind screaming past her like a ghost from the cliffs. The bitter cold slapped her face, but her eyes stayed locked on the small shape lying in the snow. The cub, a black bundle of matted fur and fragile life, didn't move. She stepped out, cautiously, every instinct on edge. The mother bear remained at the edge of the shadows, just beyond the porch light, a massive silhouette of stillness. No growl, no retreat, only eyes that watched, pleading, not threatening. Lena knelt beside the cub, its tiny chest barely rose. Her hand hovered, trembling, before gently touching its side. Warm, alive, barely. She made her decision. She scooped it up, its limp form surprisingly light, and retreated inside, kicking the door shut behind her. The heater hissed and cracked as she laid the cub on a blanket near the vents. Her hands worked on instinct. Blankets, towels, warm water bottles. She rubbed its limbs, whispering softly, as if the rhythm of her voice could stitch its soul back together. Outside, through the frost-glazed window, the mother bear didn't move. She was still there, watching, waiting, trusting. Time passed in strange silence, broken only by Lena's heartbeat and the flickering hum of the station's generator. The cub stirred, a twitch, a sigh, a gasp of breath, and Lena felt it in her bones. This wasn't a random act of nature. This was a mother asking for help, and a human answering. The storm howled louder as Lena wrapped the bear cub in layers of towels and thermal blankets. Its tiny frame barely larger than a house cat. Its breathing was shallow, erratic, every rise of its chest a fragile victory. She knelt beside it, alternating between warming compresses and whispering softly, her voice trembling with urgency. "Come on, little one, stay with me." The flickering light of the backup generator cast long, shifting shadows on the walls, giving the room the feel of a cave, ancient, primal, protective. Outside, the mother bear remained a statue in the swirling snow, a silent guardian just beyond the frost-blurred glass. Hours passed in a blur of tension and instinct. Lena didn't notice the tears slipping down her cheeks until the cub let out a faint, rasping cry, a sound so small, yet it shattered the silence like a crack of lightning. The cub shifted, eyes fluttering open for a moment, then closed again. But it was enough. It was fighting. Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Against the wild, against the cold, against every odd life had sparked, and in that moment, she understood. She hadn't just saved the cub. It had come to save her, too. The storm passed, leaving a surreal calm draped over North Raven Ridge. Lena sat on the cabin floor, beside the now empty towel nest, where the cub had rested just hours before. The mother had returned at sunrise, her hulking silhouette appearing like a ghost from the tree line. The moment Lena opened the door, the cub, still groggy but alive, had perked up, wobbling toward its mother with quiet whimpers. No growls, no roars, just a nuzzle, a hum, and a slow blink from the bear that had waited all night. A silent thank you. Now Lena couldn't stop replaying that look, the one shared between her and the bear. It hadn't been primal or wild. It had been knowing. And in that knowing, something inside Lena had cracked open. Something she had buried with Eric in the avalanche 2 years ago. Grief, yes, but also her belief in connection, in meaning. She documented everything: the weather, the bear's behavior, the cub's vitals, her own feelings. Her final note was simple. This wasn't instinct. It was a choice. Days passed in stillness, but Lena wasn't the same. The silence felt different now, less hollow, more sacred. She walked the perimeter of the station with new eyes, noticing tracks, trees, wind patterns, life, and every evening she'd stand at the porch, mug in hand, watching the tree line. Not out of fear, but out of hope, because something extraordinary had happened. And she couldn't shake the feeling. The bear might return. 3 weeks later, Lena Carter's log entry, "Black bear delivered cub, behavior suggests intentionality," caught the attention of someone unexpected. Dr. Elise Hawthorne, a renowned wildlife biologist specializing in ursine cognition, emailed her with a single line. Was it really a knock? Intrigued and slightly wary, Lena agreed to a call. Elise's voice crackled through the satellite line. Curious, grounded, yet tinged with awe. If what you described is true, this could challenge everything we know about animal behavior. Days later, Elise arrived in a bush plane, her boots crunching into the frozen earth outside Lena's station. Sharp-eyed and calm, she examined the porch where the bear had stood. Scuffed paw prints still lingered, like sacred relics etched into frost. Inside, over coffee and recorded footage, Lena replayed the moment the bear had placed the cub down. Elise leaned forward, transfixed. This wasn't desperation, she said. This was deliberate. She brought that cub to you. That night, as a fresh snow fell in hushed waves, Lena and Elise sat by the fire, discussing ancient legends of spirit bears and maternal bonds that transcended instinct. Elise referenced stories from Inuit elders, bears that remembered kindness, that sought human aid in moments of dire need. You weren't just a witness, Elise said softly. You were chosen. Lena felt something stir in her chest again, something like purpose. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. And both women knew. This story wasn't finished. It was only just beginning. By spring, the snow had begun to melt in ribbons across the valley, revealing a new path forward. After weeks of collaboration, meteorologist Lena Carter and wildlife biologist Dr. Elise Hawthorne submitted a bold proposal to build a dedicated wildlife research station on the edge of the Kaniska River Reserve, where human silence met nature's deepest voice. They called it Hollow Root Station, a name inspired by the tree where Lena had first seen the bear's fading tracks vanish. To their surprise, the application was approved. With funding secured, they broke ground on the facility. a fusion of rugged survival and cutting-edge observation, built not to control the wild, but to honor it. Lena monitored atmospheric changes. Elise tracked large mammal movement, and both kept one eye always trained on the tree line. The bear and her cub were never seen again, not clearly, but signs appeared. A paw print in the thawing mud, claw marks on a cedar post, a distant silhouette moving like a ghost at dusk. They never tried to approach. They only observed, quietly, reverently. Word of the station spread, not for its technology, but for its philosophy, science with empathy, observation with respect. Other researchers joined, drawn not by data alone, but by the story. The bear who knocked, the woman who opened the door, and every night before lights dimmed, Lena would step onto the new porch, the same way she had once before, waiting, not for a miracle, but to remember it. Months passed. The station at Hollow Root stood strong through thaw and frost, and Lena Carter and Dr. Elise Hawthorne fell into a rhythm of research and reverent silence. Though the mother bear had vanished into the forest that night, her presence never truly left. Then came the morning Elise burst into the lab, breathless. "Lena, the trail cams," she whispered, holding up her tablet. Blurry footage, time-stamped just hours earlier, showed a massive shape at the tree line, black fur, low gait, and a smaller figure beside her. A cub. The screen froze on a single frame, two silhouettes in moonlight, still as statues. Lena's heart leapt. She came back. Over the next weeks, signs surfaced like whispers, claw marks on the old birch by the creek, a half-eaten salmon laid carefully on the porch, and once, a low huff heard just beyond the trees at dusk. But never a direct sighting. The bear had become something more, a guardian, a myth. Lena and Elise began to publish their research, blending field data with the emotional truth they had lived. That connection with the wild could be mutual, sacred, and transformative. Their findings were debated, praised, dismissed, but never ignored. And always, as snow fell again, Lena would return to the porch each night, scanning the dark edges of the forest, not waiting for proof, but honoring the echo of a moment when the wild knocked, and she answered. The legend of the black bear who asked for help had just begun. Seasons passed, and winter crept once more into the bones of North Raven Ridge. Lena Carter stood on the same porch where it all began, where a mother bear had once knocked with a silent plea. The cabin was quieter now, the hum of instruments softer, the research files archived and published. But Lena's heart beat louder than ever before, not from fear, but from something deeper, reverence. She hadn't seen the bear in nearly a year, but her presence was everywhere. Paw prints in fresh snow, half-eaten fish left by the stream, and the occasional soft huff echoing through the pines at dusk. Lena didn't need to see her. She knew. The experience had transformed everything. Lena was no longer just a grieving widow buried in snow and silence. She had become a storyteller, a scientist of the soul, a guardian of the wild. Her story, and the bear's, had traveled the world, sparking conversations about animal intelligence, trust, and the unspoken bond between species. But to Lena, it had never been about fame. It had been about the knock, the one moment she could have turned away, but didn't. That night, under a sky alive with northern lights, Lena opened the cabin door once more. Cold air swept in. The trees swayed. No bear, no sound. And still, she smiled, because the message of that winter night had never left her. When the wild knocks, sometimes, it's not just asking for help. Sometimes, it's offering a chance to come alive again. Sometimes, life's most profound lessons come not through words, but through silence, instinct, and impossible moments. In the heart of a blizzard, when a grieving woman opened her door to a black bear carrying a dying cub, something ancient and beautiful unfolded, a silent plea for help and an unexpected act of trust between species. That night, survival became a shared language, and through that moment, Lena Carter rediscovered her own reason to live. The lesson is clear: when we choose compassion over fear, when we listen beyond logic, we create space for healing, not just for others, but for ourselves. The world often asks us to close our doors, to protect, to retreat. But sometimes, everything changes when we dare to open them. So if this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the power of connection, don't forget to like this video, share it, and keep the wild wonder alive.